Certification course. All of you in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online to another Peaceful Solution Character Education class. Here we're going to be continuing on with moral excellence in the workplace, building teamwork through character development. And that's exactly what is needed in a workplace. And the things we've been covering in the last few classes, the topics of ownership and what it means to own something, and what it means to have the rights to use something, and how everything belongs to somebody. And it's very important to always remember that everything belongs to someone, whether you're in a workplace, whether you're driving down the road, even in your own house. Sometimes the author of the Peaceful Solution one time, he said, go through your own house and make sure you own everything in your house. And you'd be surprised that we did that with a group of people. And, of course, they started returning a lot of items they found in their house that they borrowed and never returned, which is stealing. So it's pretty easy to do when life can be busy. It doesn't mean everybody might do something or is doing something intentional. It's easy to do something unintentional. And even though it's unintentional, it's still stealing if we take something without asking, or if we ask to borrow it for a week and a month later we still have it, that's still stealing. But specifically, we talked about, of course, in Chapter 3, mine, yours, and theirs, ownership in the workplace. And we talked about how theft is affecting society in general, how 30% or right at 33% of businesses, mostly small businesses, go out of business because of theft. And we talked about how many different ways people can steal. It's not always picking up a product and walking out the door with it. It can be, as a lot of people showed, where people were cheating by trying to fudge their time, cheating by trying to actually get paid for things they didn't do, like compensation, or people that work on commissions, trying to get a commission for something that they actually didn't do, so there was no profit there. I learned when I first came to Abilene back in 1996, I started working really close with a business that had been in Abilene since 1925. And the grandfather had started the business. The father grew the business, grew it to a really big, just a really massive, profitable business. And then before that father died, when his son took over, who was raised in money, he bankrupted that company in like 2 years. Something that was started in 1925, he was able to bankrupt it in 2 years. And it was because of being dishonest with billing and collecting of money, to the extent that, money can make people really bad. Money does bad things when not managed properly. And a lot of people, when they work for a company, say you work for Exxon, or say you work for Apple, or say you work for Tesla, these companies that are worth billions and trillions of dollars. Stealing from them is no different than stealing from a mom and pop store, small business that's just down the road. It's all the same. Just because you think a person might have more doesn't give you the opportunity or the right through morality to take something without permission or to do something. So we have to be very careful and mindful how we conduct ourselves with what we've talked about with ownership. And once again, I want to stress, as we've stressed before, because a lot of people confuse this. When the Peaceful Solution teaches no is okay, that pertains to ownership. No is not okay in every situation. And we brought up many times where child wants something to eat, but you're going to send it to bed without eating. We went through that in the parenting manual, telling the child no. That's not okay. Or say your supervisor is coming to you, or a guidance counselor is coming to you to ask you a question to solve a problem. Pleading the fifth doesn't solve problems in society. I know you see a lot of that on Capitol Hill, where people are guilty of something or they know about something. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Well, that doesn't work when you're working for a place of business, because if you don't help solve a problem, then you become part of the problem, and a corporation is going to get rid of the problem. And if you've looked in the news lately, they're having massive layoffs all around the United States right now. And the more a lot of these businesses are going to AI, the more you're going to see people getting laid off. They're even talking about a lot of things to do with the insurance business now, how that's going to change drastically because everything is going to automotive now, where they don't need your insurance salesman going out the door like they used to. So we're living in a fast-paced, developing society, but the one thing where you see computers, AI, all of these other things that can come in, robots to do a job, it's been in the automotive industry for years, it becomes less acceptable in a place of work for people to do or to take things without asking. So remember that as we finish going through this, we're going to be turning over to page 50 in the lesson plan. We're in procedure 6. So we're going to pick up in procedure 6, and it's an activity. And it says, stop and think. Allow participants time to complete the activity found on page 56. Ask volunteers to share with the class. And of course, turning over to page 56, you see the stop and think. And that's what David covered his last class, right before the class that we taught this last Wednesday. David had covered the stop and think and why it's important to stop and think. And of course, that was part of his lesson plan to call that back into mind when he was finishing up in chapter 2, was to call it back, because to stop and think, to consider what you're doing, and to consider what the result of your choices will be. Anytime we do something that's against the rules, we can go ahead and expect a negative consequence. And it might not come immediately. We might think we got by with it. We might think we did something and, well, what they don't know won't hurt them. Eventually, it's going to show. And one thing in business, that if you've ever ran a business, you'll learn eventually everything shows. It shows in the numbers. And it shows in the numbers even if you're talking about effectiveness of work. And sometimes it can take about 6 to 7 months before it shows up, but it always shows up. Or it's kind of like a farmer. If a farmer goes out, does his job, and everything falls into place, you raise a nice crop, and you see the benefit of your work. You know, now you can have hiccups, you can have drought, you can have other things that might hold back your crop. But if the farmer never goes out to plant his crop, or he halfway does it, he doesn't get a crop. He has no benefit. But everything we do, you know, they call it the fruit of our hands, or the fruit of our labor, so to speak. That's what they used to call it in the South. When you got your weekly paycheck, it was called the fruit of your hands. That was the money you got for what you did that week. And, of course, everyone wants it to be done honestly. And that's what we're talking about here is respecting the rights of ownership and making sure everything we achieve or we receive is done to an honest measure. Well, here you're going to have a wide variety depending on who's in your classroom. If you're teaching businesses, which we have taught, we've been to Trinidad and Tobago teaching businesses. We've been to Argentina teaching businesses. We've been in Mexico teaching businesses. And we've taught them here in the United States. And there's some of the most enjoyable classes that you can teach. And of course, this specific activity we're going to cover really changes with the business you're teaching. The most memorable business that I think I ever remember teaching that I thoroughly enjoyed and I learned more than I taught was when we taught customer service of AT&T in Argentina. It was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And of course, they were all English speaking. And to see the life that those people go through, you never think about it when you're on this side of it. But those people were so mentally beat down from being yelled at, cussed, screamed at. They were just a battering toy, you know, and you realize very quickly that when the person's yelling at the person in customer service, well, they're thinking about the person here in the United States that did something they didn't like. But you're literally yelling at people that their whole job, that job was so important to those people in Argentina because it paid extremely well. And Argentina is, when we were there, the dollar to the Argentinian peso was 13 to 1. Last I looked, it's like 300 to 1 now. So their economy has went down a lot. And those people, none of them wanted to lose their job. That was the biggest concern they had. And that's why they wanted us to come in, was to show them how to deal with it. And, you know, one class, you're not going to learn it. and a lot of them were really beaten down. But you looked at what was being stolen from those people was, their own self-respect and their mentality of having a peaceful life. That job was brutal. And since then, I've met other people in South America that do customer service for major companies here, and they all say the same thing. It is the most horrible job because of the way you're treated. We're the one that they're going to yell at for every problem there is. And it's hard because I had one person that was in Bogota, Colombia, tell me, people yell at me like I'm a CEO and I can make changes. Like I have the ability to say, okay, let's just do this. They don't understand that when someone calls and complains, I have to put a request in as they're talking to me. And I have to wait for the person that's answering my request to see what I can do. And that person that I'm sending a request to, their job is to make sure the company doesn't lose money. Their job isn't to please the customer. It's my job to please the customer and do it with the information they're given. So when you put these things together, you'll see how there's many different things. We've taught major companies from AT&T to Estee Lauder. It was one of the major companies we taught, and it's amazing. All of these companies they all spoke English. They were all in Spanish-speaking countries, but they all spoke English that worked for that company. That was one of their mandatory requirements, which is interesting in itself that they were bilingual. But as you look here on page 56, and you have the stop and think, and we should always stop and think. If you ever call a customer service, stop and think about how you talk to them too, by the way, okay? Never get upset with these people. Never yell and scream at them. Never lose self-control with them. You don't deserve to be helped if you do that. You deserve for someone to hang up the line because you shouldn't be treating someone like that to begin with. And when you think about it, this is the interesting part. At certain times of the day, Argentina will answer for AT&T. 12 hours out of the day. When that 12 hours is up, it switches over to India. And India answers for 12 hours a day. And it goes back and forth from India to Argentina, from India to Argentina. So, you can destroy people in two different countries just by having a very negative attitude and thinking that those people can do something for you. They can only do what they're allowed to do. And remember that when you're going through that. So stop and think. Name a few of your personal belongings that you keep at your job. Now, of course, if you're in a company, it could vary. You have different departments. But when you're teaching a group of people that might be from multiple companies, you'll get many different answers, whether you have construction workers, whether it be framers, plumbers, electricians, whatever. No matter what you have, you can have computer engineers, software designers, it's endless of the people you might have in your class. And of course, it gets down to simplistic. What we're saying here is like coffee mugs. You could get down to hammers, or whatever it is that you use on your job site that are your personal belongings. So what are some tools you have? And of course, what rules do you have regarding your belongings? And if you have belongings, surely you have rules to them. And one of the rules might be, I don't let anyone else use my tools. I know someone that is a very professional person, one of the nicest people you ever meet. And they will never let someone use their tools. For the fact they said, I worked very hard. I bought the best tools I could buy. And if someone's going to break it, it's going to be me. I don't want to get in any argument with anyone else. And I respect that because that's his right. And he does a great job with what he does. And I don't blame him for doing it because if you lend an expensive tool to somebody that can't afford to replace it, that just really, you could destroy friendships. You start having animosity. So you have to be careful about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And remember, even though you might feel bad when you look at someone and say, I'm sorry, but I don't want to lend that out. That's fine. That's okay. That's your right. And as we covered in the last class, the person should accept that answer. If they don't, that's disrespectful. No one owes you anything when it comes to someone else's property. That's not owed to you. You can ask. People can ask to borrow a car. I tend to say no a lot these days when someone asks to borrow a car. I've been through the misery of borrowing cars and lending out cars, and sometimes the cars never come back. So you tend to quit doing that. It's a complicated situation, And sometimes it's hard. And the author of The Peaceful Solution told me this one time. And he taught me a lot in this. He says, you always feel like you have to say yes to someone, but the best thing to do is learn how to say no. And when you first start doing it, you're going to feel like a really bad person. But after you get stolen from enough times and people take advantage of you enough times, you'll learn to say no with a smile on your face and walking away. And he was somebody that had been stolen from a lot of times. People tried to take advantage of him, and he would go above and beyond to help people, to give them an opportunity to fix what they broke. And he still went through that. And he told me, he said, you'll learn to say no, and you'll learn that life goes on. People might get mad at you for saying no, but life will still go on, and at least you won't have more problems. But continuing on here, it says, did anyone ever violate your rules regarding your belongings, and how did you react? So when you're on a job site or you're at your work environment, I've been to places where I've been working for the Peaceful Solution. One place, and this gives you an idea of how things work, where people really don't understand the rights of ownership. I was at a country one time, and I had my drink in my hand, and I was drinking it. Didn't think anything about it. I set it on the table. It was the only drink on the table because I needed to do something. I went back to get it. Someone else was drinking it. And I'm like, oh, they noticed I wanted my drink, so they gave it back to me. I'm like, oh, I don't want it now. You can have it. And the person that was translating for me told me that in this country, if you sit your drink down, it's considered anybody can have it. And we all just drink after each other. I said, well, where I come from, that's called disgusting. You don't do that. I said, I don't even do that with my own family. And they said, oh, family? You take and I've seen this before because I've had meetings where people had luncheons and I just pretty much sat there and talked to them. They're taking their forks and feeding other people out of their plate. And that's considered polite. That's considered customary in their country. When you sit down, everybody tastes what everybody else has. And it's very interesting. I could have bought a dish and I could have fed everybody out of my dish and not took one bite. Everybody else would have ate it for me. But it's in that country specifically, that's considered acceptable. So you have to think about when you're working with people, sometimes it could be about how they're trained. Some people think that, oh, well, I need a hammer. There's a hammer and I'm in need. Let me go get the hammer and use it. Well, remember what was talked about with the ink pen, and you can go online and find a lot of stuff where people do things and you can actually get diseases from borrowing things you shouldn't be touching. I've learned over the years, and I won't go into detail with this, but before you borrow someone's cell phone, really consider about it before you stick it up to your mouth. That's why I always tell people if they go to hand me their cell phone, put it on speaker. And I don't care who it is. Put it on speaker. I'm not sticking your phone up against my mouth. You'd be surprised. I've seen people stick their phones in places. It's amazing. And it's like, you got pockets. You don't have to do that. You got to stick it in your pocket. But be mindful, and nothing worse than somebody tell people all the time, when you go to the bathroom, playing on your phone is not the smartest thing to do. Well, I wash my hands. Yeah. After you play on your cell phone, you do. Do you wash your cell phone out when you're done? There's a lot of countries that, because of this, when you go into airports, they have cell phone cleaners. You stick your cell phone into it, it sanitizes it and gives it back to you. You don't see that in the United States, but you see it in other countries. And it's because they're usually right outside the bathroom. When you come out of the bathroom, you stick your cell phone in it, cleans it off, gives it back to you. I'm assuming it's cleaner than what it was when you put it in, but I don't know. I've never used one. But once again, you talk about these rules, you talk about the belongings, regarding your belongings, and someone violating your rules. And, you think about when you let someone borrow something, you should give them rules. And, I just thought about, I seen David come in here a little while ago, sit down. And I remember he and I and William and Catan, we used to go to a really great friend's house to stay to do things when we were teaching the Peaceful Solution. And every room you went in, he had rules listed. And to somebody that didn't understand what we teach, you would think, man, this is kind of odd. It even has rules on how to use the bathroom in here. Has rules for the refrigerator, rules for the air conditioning, rules for this. But you know what? Everybody understood what he expected when you were in his house. And it wasn't overboard. It was actually a way of him showing respect to us by, I'll let you stay here and the rules are out there. Just read the rules and just comply with those. And, you know, to some people that might have seemed a little hard, but I was thankful for it. At least I didn't have anybody screaming at me, telling me I shouldn't have done something. So, you know, think about these things, that you can put rules on everything that belongs to you. And if a person wants to use it, they need to comply with those rules or they shouldn't be using it. And then you see here, name a few items available for employee use in your workplace. You know, and this could be unlimited. Whether you see here, refrigerator in the break room, you know, it could be anything that you can imagine that's there in that place of business that you're allowed to use. You know, how do you care for it? Do you care for it the same way as others do? You know, you think about restrooms that other people might come into. Do you make sure that it's clean? It needs to be as clean as it was when you went in, and hopefully someone left it clean for you. And of course, what rules have been established regarding these items? And everywhere you work, there has to be rules. If without rules, you have chaos. There's no way to establish a peaceful environment without rules and without people understanding those rules. And I'm not talking about rules of oppression. I'm talking about rules that help keep people safe, that help people, you know, enjoy their job. Rules actually help us enjoy our job. And sometimes we can get upset when someone, I know work areas, and I'll give you an example, because this is how it gets kind of complicated, but yet it's simple. Because I have certain work areas I deal with that fall in the same way, where I have tools that are given to me, I'm responsible for, but they're not my tools. I was given those tools, and I'm the one that's responsible for them. And when people want to use them, or they ask to borrow them, the answer is always no. Because I have to answer to an organization that let me borrow those tools or that gave me those tools for me to be responsible for. And the rules are very clear when they were given to me. And sometimes people feel like that when you tell them, I'm sorry, but I can't lend you that. Why? You don't have to answer why. You never have to answer. It's yours, or you're responsible for it. So always be mindful that if you ask someone, hey, can I borrow that? And they go, no, I can't let you do that. Whatever you do, don't look back and go, why? Because that's a form of disrespect. They gave you an answer, and it's not a political debate. It's not up for negotiation. If someone comes to you and said, can I borrow your car? And you say, no, sorry, I can't let you do that. Well, why not? Do you really feel like you need to have to explain to them why? You worked for that car. You paid for that car. It was your hard-earned money that went into doing it, and that might be the only car you have and the only one you can afford. And if something occurs to it, you know, as someone did one time that I know, they borrowed a car and they wanted to return it in the best working condition, so they made sure to fill it up with diesel. The only problem was it was a gasoline car, and that was a mess to clean up. It was blessed that we were able to get all the stuff out of there, but you know, you have to be mindful that people can do that, and not intentional, not purposely trying to do something bad. So make sure that when you're saying no, you could be saying no just to save that person from a financial hardship. But once again, the answer no is okay for workplace, for ownership. That's the only time no is okay, for ownership. You will not find in the peaceful solution anywhere else where telling someone no is okay. It's only pertaining to ownership. Now, there are times when you can tell people no, but there's a lot of times where you can't tell people no. You know, and that's something to always remember. No is okay pertains to ownership. And as I referred you back last time, one of the best books we have that explains that is the 5th grade unit of the Peaceful Solution. And that's something that everyone would benefit from. But when you're an authority or you're a supervisor or you're there to make decisions, yeah, you have a right to say no to certain things. But, you know, no is to prevent harm to yourself, someone else, or the environment, or anything that can cause immorality. If someone asks, you know, if they ask to do something and it doesn't bring harm to themselves, someone else, or the environment, and it complies with the rules, You're not going to find someone tell you, nah, I don't think you should, because I don't like the way you do it. I don't like what you brought to eat today or something. You'll find that that's not the case. That brings discourse. That's not bringing the peaceful solution. So here you see it says true positive character at the bottom. True positive character development begins with controlling our thoughts, which leads to feelings, which leads to moral actions, and then positive results. And that's the only way to get positive results, is to applying the rules, accepting the rules, or the answers that come from these rules being implemented and applied. And once again, when you get into the workplace, you'll have a million things that people can go through on that. When it comes to the stopping, the thinking, and items that are borrowed and what they do, but it'll always fit into the workplaces. There's never a time you'll go into a workplace where they won't have an answer. You'll find that it's extremely interesting and very enjoyable as a teacher, because you'll learn a lot too about that workplace. Now, going back over to the procedures, procedure 7 on page 50, we're going to conclude the lesson by asking students to state their own words the concept of ownership and the importance of it in the work environment. So you want to basically use them as a soundboard. You want to ask them so you can have them repeat back to you. They don't have to be verbatim. Let them say them in their own words, but to make sure that they're grasping that concept of ownership and they understand it and they understand the implementation of it. And it doesn't mean that once you get through with this chapter, got it down, no problem. Every job site, every workplace, it will adapt a little differently depending on the rules in the workplace. Some people have some authority to do things where some people might not. Some people have responsibilities where others might not. So even though you might have to think about it, that's the whole point of stopping and thinking. How does this rule apply in this situation? And then once you understand how the rule applies, and you might need to ask a supervisor, how does this rule apply? But once you understand how the rule applies, that's the peaceful solution. If you don't agree with that rule, or, well, I think we should do this, that's not the peaceful solution. That's actually war. So make sure that when we find out how this rule applies, that we accept this rule, even if it's something that, well, it would have made life easier if you would have let me do it. Yeah, well, but sometimes can't do that. It's not always about what we want. Even though we might think it's the most important thing on the face of the earth, there's rules that govern everything, and breaking the rules will never make it better. So have that discussion with them. And then it says, choose a participant to read the section, What It All Boils Down To, found on page 57. Emphasize the need to consistently practice self-control in order to make respectful and honest choices in regards to the property of others. So looking over here to page 57, and of course this is after you've had your conversation, making sure that everyone has an ideal of what ownership is, and they might have questions, and that's fine to answer their questions. Let them have the freedom to speak. Let them have the freedom to, you don't want them feeling like you're looking at them wanting every word that you said repeated back. You want to hear their own words from what they've gathered so you can get an honest assessment of how well you've communicated the class to them. And you might find where some people might not have got it. You might find where some people did get it. You might find your whole class got it very well. That's usually the case. But here on page 57, what it all boils down to. It says, an immoral attitude toward the possessions owned by a company can result in higher expenses for the business, which means lower salary, wages, unsustainable raises, layoffs, and distrust between coworkers and management. So you can actually drain a business to where even when they do give you a raise, it's not enough to keep up with inflation itself. You can't even sustain yourself. But every little bit, and this is something, if you've ever taken business administration, I always tell people if you ever have an opportunity, you should take it. I took 4 years of business administration as an elective, as when I was doing my business, because I really wanted to know how the ins and outs worked. And there was one example they gave us where someone cheats on their time 5 minutes a day. At the end of the year, they have stole thousands of dollars. And you think 5 minutes a day is not going to be that much. It adds up to a tremendous amount. And the reason they show you this, they showed you where if a person's going to cheat on their time, They're also going to take, if they have a 30-minute lunch, they're going to take a 45-minute lunch. They're already dishonest. They're going to go to the bathroom, and they're going to spend a lot of time in the bathroom. They're going to go outside to do something, and they're going to stay outside doing something. They're going to go run errands, and you know what? They're going to run their own personal errands while they're running one for the company too. And I'm thankful I've never had to endure people like that working for me that do things that drastic. But they showed where major companies lose hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And the first thing they know to check for is who's dishonest on their time. Because a person that will cheat on their time or lie about their time, they're going to cheat all throughout the day. And they found that to be true. So be mindful. We talked about last week, when you're supposed to be at work at 8 o'clock, what time are you supposed to be there? Be there early, right? You're supposed to be working at 8 o'clock, not driving up, not walking out of your car, not eating your sandwich, not, I'll be back, I'm going to go grab breakfast. No, if you're supposed to be there at 8, you should be there at 8, not walking through the door, not doing all kinds of ins and out things. If you want your pay to start at 8, you need to be working at 8. That's fair enough, right? That's fair enough. If you want the company to pay you at 8 o'clock, you should be working at 8 o'clock. That's, if you were the company, you would look at it that way. And if you ever have a business, you'll want it that way. Not that you're wanting to oppress anyone. It's a lot harder to sit there and argue, well, you didn't get here to this time. If people would just show up on time, everything works smooth. And that's what we all have to do, is put forth our best effort to do it. So we can actually alleviate these things that take place in business. Notice that here it says, because these simple moral principles of ownership is ignored, crimes such as theft, burglaries, business corruption, and scandals are rampant in our society. And you can see, just Google corruption or embezzlement on Google. It's amazing how much this takes place all of the time. I know we've seen it in the news here in Abilene. It was last year. There was a lot of it took place with certain organizations were doing it. There were people that were supposed to be in authority. They were CFOs, chief financial officers. They were embezzling money. But think about this. What's the difference between someone who skims out of a checking account for a business? Let's say they're taking money to the side, or the person who lies about their time. What's the difference? Absolutely none. Both people are stealing money from the business. So think about it. One might be stealing a lot more than the other, because I know we had a situation that was in Abilene with I'm not going to mention the organization, but I think that lady took almost $300,000 out of that organization before they realized she was even taking it. That's an enormous amount of money. And of course, she went to Vegas, she went to the Bahamas, she went to a lot of places, so she didn't really have a lot of money, and there's no way she could pay it back. And she's probably still in jail right now for what she did. And it's sad, because it's sad that people aren't trained better to not do that. And that's really where it comes from, is the training. Because the consequence, no one ever goes to jail thinking, man, I'm sure glad I did that. Look at my reward. Now I get 3 meals a day, a nice place to sleep. It's not like you're staying at the resort. You're going to a really bad place, and I've never seen anyone enjoy it. But continuing along here, we're talking about an immoral attitude, and towards others, towards the belongings of others, includes taking or borrowing something without permission, as well as willfully abusing or destroying items of others. When you think about that, you get mad at someone, and I'll teach him, or I'll do this and that. This is more and more, this is war. This is chaos. This might seem far-fetched, but this is what destroys businesses. And if you need your job and you like your job, even if you hate your job, if it's what's helping you to survive, you probably need to remember that, I kind of do need the money. If that's the only reason you go to work is for the money. And I tell you what, I would never want a job that I just go to work for the money. It would, that's one thing that we can say about the peaceful solution. If you come to work for the money, you won't come, first day you'll quit. Doesn't pay anything. It's the reward of knowing and helping to do what's right. That's the best reward of all. And when you go into a business, and if it seems frustrating, if it seems complicated, if things aren't working right, most of the time it's because really the peaceful solution is not fully implemented or even taught in that facility. Because once it's done, everything runs a lot smoother. Everything becomes more enjoyable. The purpose of the business is seen. And of course, everybody works to accomplish a goal, and everybody plays a part in that. But when we take, when we steal, when we do anything that goes against rules or how to build up the business, then it becomes very detrimental. Because if you steal from a company and you're causing that company to suffer, you know your thefts are also affecting everyone else in that company. When that company goes to give out raises, you're not the only person that should get a raise. There's a lot of other people who work for that company that are entitled to a raise too. And those people might not be stealing from that company. They might actually be honest people who are doing an honest job, but they're suffering financially because someone might be stealing. You know, and that's a very difficult thing. And corporations, you know, once again, Enron, that's one of the best examples of a lot of people lost their jobs, lost their investments, lost a lot of stuff where a few people embezzled the money in. And we're talking millions of dollars. So continuing on, it says, keep in mind that character is based on morality. Moral principles are what separates a positive character from a negative one. It's very important to understand what this is, because a lot of people don't understand the difference between morals and morality. Morals are rules, and we learned that in the character unit on page 8 of the junior high series, the character unit. Morals are rules. Morality is the application of those rules. If you live in society and you're applying the rules, then you are living in a moral society or morality. If you live in a society where the rules are being broken, the rules aren't adhered to, they're not considered important, that's immorality. You live in a very immoral society. And that's what we all live in right now, a very immoral society. If you want an example, let me finish reading this last sentence and we'll talk about a great example that I just seen, and I'm sure it'll be out there more. It says, having moral principles like self-control will ensure you make positive decisions, which shows respect to others, their possessions, and their rights of ownership. Now, speaking of ownership and rights of ownership in companies, most people here in the United States know that there's a lot of ships off the coast of Venezuela, a lot of war ships, military ships, some of the biggest ones in the world. In Venezuela, they have no clue these things are off their coast. And I know firsthand, they have no clue these ships are off their coast, not the citizens. And in fact, a lot of countries thought it was fake news. We know that's not true. And it's like, well, no, that's true. They're out there. And I watched, and I'm not speaking against the President of the United States whatsoever. I thoroughly enjoy listening to President Donald Trump sometimes. Sometimes he says things that are harsh realities, well, I call it. But they asked him, with this last tanker that they took control of, that come from Venezuela, Venezuelan oil, what are you going to do with the oil? And he very quickly goes, oh, we're going to keep it. It's ours. And I thought, how's it ours? You know, well, they let us go in and drill back in the 70s, and they gave us that land to drill on, so everything under that land, that's ours. And I'm thinking, you know, you can't even buy land in Texas and get the mineral rights to it. You have to buy the mineral rights too. So I'm not for sure how their agreements worked out, but I would think Venezuela in 1950s and 60s was the 4th largest economy in the world. So those people were making money. They knew what they were doing. They weren't a bunch of, imbeciles that couldn't understand business. And then their oil starts leaving. So you think about this in business sense. That oil belongs to not the government of Venezuela. It belongs to the people of Venezuela. That's who it belongs to. And if they develop that oil, it gives jobs. The sale of that oil gives money. It creates, just like oil here in the United States. Texas is a very, which is a business, by the way. Texas is a business. It's a state. It's a business. If you're part of an organization, every organization, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, is a business. And every organization operates with these rules. But think about here in Texas, we enjoy a lot here because of the oil. There's a lot of oil money, and we get that through people working for oil fields, people making money. We have billionaires that live in Texas that make money. And they spend that money here in Texas. And Texas they benefit from it. Well, think about here in Venezuela, they have the same thing, but someone's stealing their most lucrative resource. And they take it and they use it. And think about the same thing is being done to Syria right now, too. They take their oil and they sell it. Now, I'm not trying to condemn anyone, and I'm not trying to speak bad about anyone, because there's been multiple presidents involved in this, by the way, not just President Donald Trump. This goes all the way back to before 9/11, where these things taking place. But think about if someone came into your company and they stole your most lucrative or your best investment, what you make your most money on, and they stole that from you, how close of a friend do you think you're going to be to that person? Because that person obviously is not a friend to you. They're stealing from you. They're taking it from you. How do you think you're going to create peace in a situation like that? And we can look at what the governments do and think, man, they shouldn't do that. But these rules that apply on these large scale levels, they apply on these lower scale levels too. What applies to a small business applies to a corporation. What applies to a state applies to a government. That's federal. And in every state, every country, every business, every person has a right of ownership, and they should be able to benefit from what they own. And it's very important to try to look at everything you see through that standpoint. When you look at countries, look at the United States as a business and Venezuela as a business, or look at Israel and Palestine. 2 countries, 2 businesses. Look at what people go through when people don't respect the rights of ownership, when people take things without permission. And you might think, it's not that big a deal. People die every day because of this. People are dying all over the world because of it. Hatred is at an all-time high because of it. So don't think if you're working for a small company or a small organization that no one will notice. All of these big things we see started off really, really small. And they got really, really big because no one stood up for what was right. And it's continuing to get big. To the big, it's only going to keep getting bigger until it can't get any bigger. So with those things in mind, we're going to look over here to chapter 4 and keeping in mind about the rights of ownership here on page 59. And it's ask, more than just a 3-letter word. And very important, once again, when you ask, that means you're going to get an answer. And when you get an answer, as we talked about before, you have to accept the answer or it's disrespect. If you ask to borrow something and someone says no, then it's thank you for answering my question or thank you for considering it. That's what it really should be. It shouldn't be, well, you have 10 cars. Why can't I borrow one? I'm sorry, you can't borrow that. And it should be that simple. You don't have to explain why. And that's part of your rights of ownership. Well, here in ask, remember asking, and of course this goes along with the other one, but it's very important to notice the very first sentence in this line or in this paragraph here. In this lesson, the concept of asking is taught. So is that something I need to learn? Well, yeah, because asking is one part, and part of asking is accepting an answer. So in this lesson, the concept of asking is taught as one of the means of developing, notice, a positive moral character. So asking for something, showing that you respect the rights of ownership, it actually shows that you're developing positive moral character. And as we get into this, you'll see that accepting the answer is just as important as asking. They're both equally as important. Notice it says, why include asking as a part of moral character development? The answer might seem simple on the surface, but has profound implications. Although it can easily be overlooked as part of training in positive moral character, encouraging the habit of asking, and I want you to circle that word habit. And remember what we learned in chapter 3 of the character unit with how to develop a habit through practice, practice, practice. And it even showed that we can have positive habits, we can have negative habits. But they have to be developed. It has to be something we work at continually. It has to be something that we never, we don't drop the ball on. It's like waking up one day and, I don't think I'm going to breathe today. I think I'll just take the day off from breathing. well, you're not going to go very well, when you do that. Well, positive moral character is the same way. You can't wake up one day and, I think I'm going to go steal something today. I'm just not going to be honest today. I'll make up for it tomorrow. And if you remember in the Building More Excellence unit, we had the little cartoon there with the guy standing before the judge. I only stole one time. And the judge replied, that's all it takes to be a thief. One time. That's it. Doesn't take any more than that. So think about that. And you never want your employer to call you a thief. You never want anyone to call you a thief. But I guarantee you, all of us sitting in this room right now watching online, I guarantee you we've all in our lives have stolen something through not adhering to rules or coming in late or leaving early or taking an extra 5 minutes for lunch or so, whatever. We are all guilty of it. I can guarantee you we are. Or where I worked at, people had the habit of punching other people in, because when I worked in the furniture factory, you got paid for just coming on time. You could make $150 a week just for showing up to work on time. And if somebody was late, they'd call somebody else and you just punched their clock. I didn't do this. I'm just saying they did. They'd punch. I don't want people to think I did that because I never did it. But they'd punch the clock and put their card over it. And it got so bad, they gave people ID badges where you had to pull out your ID badge and it had to be your fingerprint that went with the ID badge before you clocked in, because people were stealing so much. And it was sad because the company didn't have to pay you for being there on time. They just did it. It was one of the benefits that you got for working for that company. And of course, you had to meet a product level. You got so much percentage of product, and then you got for being there on time. But they made it easy to do it. And people still cheated. They cheated on something that the company was giving them that they didn't even have a right to. The company just did it. And people still cheated to get it. But here, once again, it says, although it can be easily overlooked as part of training, in positive moral character, encouraging the habit of asking to meet our needs, to discover what others need, to secure our safety, and to receive instructions and clarification are important avenues by which self-control, respect, and responsibility are developed. So once again, we're talking about that development. That's a growth. That's something we have to work toward. It's not something that's just going to, evolve on its own. We have to actually put some effort into doing it. So asking to touch, use, or borrow an item, and then abiding by the decision the owner makes shows self-control and respect. But that's only part of the benefits of asking. So once again, when you accept someone tells you no, you're actually practicing the peaceful solution. You're practicing positive character by respecting that person has a right to that. And think about how you would feel if you asked someone, hey, can I borrow that? No, you can't borrow it. And then that person asked you, hey, can I borrow this over here? No, you can't borrow that. Well, why? Because you didn't let me borrow this. And then it becomes tit for tat. But what if that person that you asked that said no goes and takes what they asked you to borrow and you said no and they used it anyway? How would that make you feel? You'd probably get pretty upset. Well, I respected that person's rights and they didn't respect mine. Then what do? Well, next time I won't respect theirs. I'll do what I want to do next time. I'll show them. And then this is the war that goes on in the mind of, mankind, so to speak. We always want to get the upper hand, but even if someone does you wrong, you need to make sure you're doing what's right. And if there's a situation that arises like that, go to, if you have human resources, go to human resources. If you have, I know some organizations have guidance counselors, go to guidance counselors. I know people that have, people that are literally there, they're called problem solvers. They're actually sent in, Amazon has them. And they go in and because they're supposed to solve the problems. Of course, they're supposed to solve the problems for the benefit of the company, but think about it in a peaceful solution way. And think about how it can be done. So learning to ask to fulfill our needs also denotes responsibility as well as honesty. Asking for instructions and clarification helps to develop the important character trait of humility. Once again, you see that word develop. It's something we have to grow. I always think of a development as when we have a piece of empty land and someone comes in and they develop the land. They get it ready to build on. The first thing they have to do is prep the land to build. And it's very interesting if you've ever looked into what it takes to develop property. The first thing that you do when you develop property, and it's city code in Abilene, you have to make sure the property is going to drain the same as it did when you first got it. Before you break ground, the city wants to make sure it's going to drain the same. And you'll see, when you go through Abilene, you'll see these concrete barriers with V notches in them. Well, that's drain control. They learned that at the airport out here when they didn't do it very well one time. They built a boat facility across the road from it, and the drainage didn't get done right, and it caused a horrible problem. But that's one of the things they look for. And the same thing with your character. When you first start out, you got to make sure that, well, whatever's okay in my life, whatever's positive, I keep that. Whatever's negative, I got to get rid of that. But I got to make sure I don't start alleviating the positive. I got to keep the positive. I need to get rid of the negative. So everything that's beneficial, you keep. And people might not see the beneficial. When someone sees a piece of land, it looks, it's rough, it's nasty, no one's touched it in years. It just sits there. Well, the city expects if you go to develop it, that it doesn't change from the way it affects the city as far as the drainage and everything else. And then, of course, they want it to bring in money. Well, your positive character is going to bring in benefits to you. But this development, always think about how you see something develop, whether housing or whatever, but you want it developed in a positive way. Here it says teaching employees the importance of asking can result in greater trust and respect between coworkers. And that's really the ultimate goal, is to have everybody in unity, everybody benefiting each other, everybody being a benefit to each other. That's really the ultimate goal. This will eliminate many conflicts and acts of dishonesty. When the concept of asking is encouraged in the workplace, a unified, peaceful environment can be achieved. And that's really what every business wants. Everybody's in business to succeed. You're in business to make money. The peaceful solution is in business to bring forth positive character. That's what you could say that's the money of the peaceful solution, positive character. It's not coming on green or whatever other dollar, dinero, peso, whatever it is you want to look at. That's not what our goal is. Even though it takes money to do things, that's not our goal. Our goal is to teach through what we've learned and what we're still working to implement. One thing we definitely don't do is go around trying to convince everybody, if you want to be like me, this is what you need to do. What are you? I'm one of the best people on the face of the earth. No, it's not really that way. We're trying, and the more you take the peaceful solution, the more you teach it, the more you see you need it. And when you go into a workplace, it's make sure that you take the lowliest person that's there, whether it be, some people will say the janitor or the person who sweeps the floor. Well, make sure that person's there along with the CEO, the COO, the CFO, and every supervisor, because everyone needs to hear it. Everyone needs to hear the peaceful solution, including the people that teach it. That's why when we're not teaching these classes, we're listening to these classes, and you always learn something. And once again, look at the peaceful solution as a business. But our goal, all of these rules apply, but our goal is to bring positive character. And right now, we see a huge surplus in the peaceful solution business. It's something that you're not seeing online yet, but we have a lot of really great people that come to classes, and now they're teaching, and they're doing an excellent job in what they're doing. And there's a lot of people that are very interested in hearing these things. We get messages every day. Sadly, we get them in languages that we don't even speak right now. That's the challenge to some of this. But there's a lot of them we have that are in English and Spanish and French, and we're capable of doing those. Japanese, we're capable of doing those. Many different dialects in the Philippines and in Kenya, we're capable of doing those. Even languages such as tribal languages in Nigeria, like Igbo, we're capable of doing those. And it all becomes possible because people join this workforce called the Peaceful Solution, and they learn how to do it. They want to comply with the rules, and then they take it and they give it to someone else. And the benefit of that, it's going to be seen, but it takes time. But it's going to be seen, no doubt about it. Just for the fact we're going in the right direction means that we're doing well. The day that we I don't care about this. I'm just going to start stealing from now on. I want oil like my government just took oil. That's how I want my stuff. Well, usually when you steal oil, usually a missile follows in behind that not long afterwards. So it'll be interesting to see. But looking over here to chapter 4, lesson plan, topic, ask more than just a 3-letter word. The purpose and objective, once again, and I know we talk about a lot of things in here and what we're doing. And really remember that we try to give a lot of ideology for different workplaces because most of the people in here are in workplaces. I know we have some youth that are in here that they haven't started working yet, but we do have a great co-op when it comes to teaching people, like a home economics course and things like that, when we have vacation time like the schools have here, we allow them to go out and learn things and to develop their knowledge and things. I tell you what, I would have known. The Peaceful Solution is one organization that, I would have loved. I know young men that can tell you how to operate a tractor. I never got on a tractor till I was like 35 years old. Didn't know a thing about one. Had to start learning from there. In the Peaceful Solution education program that we have here, you can start learning to run a tractor and developing the ability to know how to do certain things. There's people that know how to weld. By the time they're 18 years old, they're doing great jobs because they took these classes, that extra credit classes that are offered through the training of character education. They take these extra classes that they're offered and they have great people that can teach them. And it's mind-blowing how much knowledge and how much training youth can have. By the time they're 20 years old, they know things that I still don't know. And I've worked a lot in my life, but they can tell you how to do things and show you how to do things, and it's impressive. And and you see that and you think society could really improve, because one thing that you see here, a young person, let's say you have someone's 18 years old. I want to know how to weld. You know what? That's possible. I want to know how to do this. You know what? That's possible. But one thing you don't see them doing, well, I want the last Nintendo game. That's not possible. Sorry, not here anyway. But when you think about it, and I'm only bringing this up because when you think about the workplace and the training, think about how far a young person is set behind because they're given a video game to play instead of being taught how to do a job. Think about how many years of their life are gone in that. And they get addicted to them. And I know people say, well, you can make money now playing video games. Well, not everybody does it. But here's the purpose and objective. Students will learn about the importance of asking in the workplace. They will explore the consequences of not asking and the rewards of asking. And yes, there is a reward from asking. That's very important. Once again, you need the paper, pencils, and always a book. If you don't have a book, just, go online there on Facebook and you can download it. If you're not someone that does social media, and I don't blame you, I don't have Facebook either, just send us a message and we'll send it to you. You can send it to info@peacefulsolution.org. There's 4 instructors that teach these classes. If you have their number, and it seems like everybody around the world does. I just got another, I don't know what country that's from, that just came through. But you send it to any 4 of those instructors, they'll get it to you. You can call the 1-888-613-94 number, and they will get a hold of one of us to get it to you. But whatever you do, if you need it and you don't have it, just send us a message and we'll get it to you, because you really need the book. And they're free. The download, the PDF that we send is free. There's no charge for it. The information in it is what we need to get across to you. Well, I'm going to stop right here. That way William can pick up in the review of the lesson plan, because otherwise we're going to start in here and we're going to finish like halfway. So I'm going to stop on page 61. William will pick up with procedure 1 for chapter 4. And once again, in closing, if there's any questions that arise, please send them in. If there's any place, someone asked if we would teach the workplace in a workforce environment. We have lots of teachers here that we'll be more than glad to send out. We have quite a few teachers here we will send to help teach in the workplace. So if you are interested in having classes taught in the workplace, obviously we're not going to send someone and keep them there for 6 months. A lot of things are done through the internet these days, which has been found since COVID. Everybody's kind of stuck to that. But we've actually went to facilities and taught the peaceful solution there also. But I will tell you, one class is not going to solve problems. You have to go through the curricula and through the program in its entirety if you want the benefit out of it. You can't just go through chapter 1 and expect chapter 12 to take effect. It doesn't work that way. So if you're interested in it, by all means, send us a message and we will work out something one way or another to teach your workplace. And right now it's free. So just ask for it and we can get it to you for free. You know, won't always be free. Sometimes it may cost you a plane ticket for someone to get there, but right now it's free. So this is the best time to ask for it. Our next class is going to be this coming Wednesday. It'll be December 31st, and we'll join back with William at 5:30 p.m. Thank you once again for joining us.